Allison. I am a reading specialist and the author of the blog, Learning of the Primary Pond. And I'm coming live to you today because I wanted to share a few quick, relatively simple ideas that can help you spice up your guided reading routine. So if you're joining me, I'd love for you to say hi. Let me know what grade you teach. Always love to know kind of what grade I'm speaking to, a focus on K2, but curious to see what you teach. So when we're talking about guided reading, we're talking about the small groups that you're pulling. Maybe you're having, your kids read instructional level text and you're giving them a little bit of a book introduction and then they're reading and you're discussing the book. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about guided reading. I do have a webinar that you can watch that will go way more in depth on like the basis of guided reading. So do feel free to let me know in the comments if you would like to see that webinar. I can give you the link later if you haven't watched it yet. So I can definitely do that for the basics, but we're today really focusing on taking it to the next level. Hey, Jennifer, first grade teacher, glad you're here. So anyway, before we really dive into what are some things that we can do to mix things up during guided reading, I actually want to talk about really quick, small groups and guided reading in general, because I think that when I was first teaching, I believed that all small groups when it came to reading had to be guided reading. So I equated small groups with guided reading, and that's not necessarily true. They don't always have to be guided reading. So before we get into all of this, I just want to remind you that when you're pulling your kids, as long as you don't have something that's required by your school or district, of course, when you're pulling your kids into a small group, it doesn't necessarily have to be guided reading. Guided reading can be really helpful, but some other things that you might consider doing are doing something like a strategy group, where maybe you have kids at different levels, but they all, for example, need to work on retelling, or they all need to work on like breaking up words into syllables or work on some sort of fluency strategy. You can bring readers at different levels to your small group, and maybe you work with a text that, most of the kids can handle pretty well, and you provide support for those kids that might struggle, but you're all working with the same text. Maybe it could be even an easy text depending on strategies or skills you're working on. And those kids you can help them practice whatever their area of weakness is, or whatever they can grow in with, still all being at different levels with one text. So strategy groups are one option. Another thing you can do is you can pull kids together and give them support in working with grade level text. It doesn't necessarily have to be their instructional level. Instructional level is something that's, a little bit higher than what they could read on their own to kind of push them, and that's great, but it's also great for kids to be exposed to grade level text. So if you have a first grader who is reading, at an end of kindergarten level, well, now we're, midway into the year, it's okay to bring those kids into a group with grade level text, and then you provide some support. You pre-teach them some words before you even read it, and then they can be successful with the text, and then maybe you're working on comprehension that's appropriate for that. So you're giving them that experience in a text that's at grade level, which they need to eventually get to, and you're just providing support to do that. So anyway, hey everybody, hey Anita, hey, Michelle, Sherry, welcome everybody. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because I just have a little bit of time tonight to share with you, but I just want you to consider doing things other than your standard guided reading when you have a small group. You could even do a read aloud if you want to work on comprehension. Some kids maybe aren't participating as much in whole group. You could do a shared reading if you need to model some strategies. That can be done in a small group too. So a small group does not always have to equal guided reading, just throwing that out there. We are not, of course, again, you may have specific requirements at your school or at your district, but we don't have to be, bound to guided reading so tightly unless we're, following our admin's instructions. We don't have to be bound to it so tightly because we're trying to teach. We have these goals, these things that we're trying to teach our kids, and guided reading is a tool to help us teach them, but it's not the only tool for small group instruction. So that tangent aside, let's go into what I came here today to share with you, which is little things that you can do to mix up your guided reading groups. So one thing that I really love to do with my kids, and this is especially helpful for English language learners, your kids maybe are struggling with background knowledge or don't have a lot of content knowledge that's related to what you're reading, is before the lesson, I will pull up something on YouTube. Obviously, you want to watch it ahead of time to make sure that it's appropriate, and you may not even want to show them the whole video. But for example, if you're having the kids read a book about Chinese New Year, some kids may know what that is and they may have seen stuff on TV, but some kids maybe can't even imagine. And it's really cool, like the Chinese New Year parade and the dragon and stuff, like showing them in a little video clip what that's like really brings it to life and it motivates them. And as long as you have it queued up ahead of time, maybe you just watch a little chunk of it, that it just takes a few seconds. You watch the video, hey guys, want to show you this. Okay, today we're going to be reading this book that's about Chinese New Year. You can do it with animals. You can do it even with, like when the kids get a little bit older and they're trying to understand more challenging scientific concepts. Like today, this was a 4th grader. This is obviously great, beyond the scope that we're talking about tonight with K2, but it's like a Newton's something or other, where the balls are like colliding and stuff. We looked up a video of that and we watched that, and that was helpful. There's so much out there that can A, get your kids excited about what they're reading, but B, build that background knowledge, because, and I can't quote where, but there has been a good amount of research that shows that a child or any reader, even adult reader, a reader's ability to comprehend a text depends so much on their background knowledge that they're bringing to the text. So if you can front load a little bit of background knowledge ahead of time, that may help them with their reading, in addition to just get them excited about it. All right, next up on my list, I have kid-led strategy instruction. Now, sometimes I go into my guided reading group and I'm like, okay, we've been working on this in whole group, and for this particular group of kids, they need more practice on it. So we're gonna, work on this specific strategy, this maybe fluency strategy, like, try to read in phrases, or this comprehension strategy. We've been working on it in whole group, and so now for alignment, I'm gonna bring it down to my guided reading group and we're gonna work on it here. And that's awesome. Or sometimes you may have a strategy that's really specific to their level. So for example, when kids are moving from level B to C, the pattern in the book is not as strong. It changes if you're using level text. So maybe your strategy has something to do with like, look ahead in the book for words that you already know, so that the kids don't get so freaked out when it's not such a pattern text. So your strategy that you're working on could be really tied to your level, or it could be tied to something that the kids have been doing or not doing, and that's something that you feel that they need to grow in. So it could be pre-planned, is my point, before you go into the lesson. But sometimes it's really nice to build on what actually happens during the lesson and let the kids teach a strategy. So this is how I do it sometimes. When the kids are reading, I will listen in, see what they're doing, notice if they're using any really great, problem-solving strategies for the words. And then afterward, I might have a child, if they're able to, describe to the rest of the kids what strategy they used and why they used it. So, on this particular word, let's just say that the word is hike, right? So let's say a child is trying to read hike and they don't know it, and I notice they say the word like, and then they figure out that it's hike. So it's like reading by analogy, right? So after the group, I might say, okay, boys and girls, you know what? Vanessa, I noticed, was having a little bit of trouble with the word hike, but then but actually, you know what? I wouldn't say that. I would then say, sometimes you can articulate what the kids have done for them. But in this example, what I was trying to tell you is that you can actually have Vanessa then explain, okay, well, I thought about the word like, and then that helped me figure out what hike was. So sometimes I do articulate what the kids are doing, but when I can, and when you have a child who's able to articulate it, it's great if they can teach each other. It's just so much more meaningful when it comes from them, right? Like it's one of their peers, they use this strategy. So then maybe the next time another child is reading, they'll think about Vanessa and the like and hike, and they'll use something similar. So that's really meaningful for them to hear it coming from a peer. Speaking of kind of like student leadership, this is something that I don't necessarily do to spice things up. It's just something that I always do after the first couple of months of school. When the kids are retelling, which is something that we work on over and over again, because it seems like at every level that's something that they still need to work on. But so after we're finished reading the text, I will have the kids retell, but instead of me always like trying to pull them along and guide them through the retelling, I really want to put the responsibility on them, which is good for them in terms of developing their like sense of agency. Like, yes, I can retell on my own, but it's also more fun for them. So I will typically pick a retelling leader, and that leader will go first, and then we may go in a circle, or they choose somebody that they want to retell what happens next, but that leader is really responsible for guiding the retelling. The kids can check each other if they've said something that's incorrect. I teach them to, how to respectfully go back to the book and say, hey, no, I think this is what really happened. So it's just, really getting so much more independence, or asking so much more independence of them than for me to always be like, okay, guys, what happened first? What happened next? Is that necessary at first? Absolutely. Like, they don't typically walk into my room already being able to retell on their own without me doing anything. This takes some time and it takes some modeling, but eventually it's a really great thing to do. So not only is it something that will spice things up, but it's just also great for developing their independence. Another thing I like to do, of course, I'll have my like higher level thinking questions that I'll ask after we do the retelling. And that's great, but that gets a little boring when we're doing the same thing over and over again. So something that I like to do is mix things up, and hopefully you can see these here. These are from my guided reading bundles. I believe I pulled it from Level J. But I have a fiction and a nonfiction spinner. So sometimes instead of me just asking them questions, traditional, whatever, after guided reading, I will take like the genre, if we're reading nonfiction, and I'll have on this spinner different questions that will work with most nonfiction books that are appropriate to the level. So for example, how did the author organize this text? What is one question you still have about the topic? What text feature was most helpful to you? So these are things that will work with most nonfiction texts, and it's just so much more fun to them because it's a game. Mrs. Ryan isn't asking you questions. They get to have a little, pencil, paper clip, spin it around the pencil tip, and then they answer this question that's listed here. So it's just a fun way to change things up once in a while. You could do this with like dice. You could make a die out of, like thick paper like this is, so that it holds up better, and write different questions on it. That works too. I have some board games in my guided reading packs where they, move and then they answer questions. As long as you can, not waste too much time in them having them play the game, it's just a fun way to change things up, and it's also good for comprehension, right? Okay, another thing I want to talk about in terms of changing things up is to try a different type of text. And actually, I might link this here to the last thing. So typically for guided reading, I'll look for those like level books, and those are great. But sometimes, like, what if you have a Scholastic reader? Or what if you have like a brochure that you picked up when you were on vacation? Some like tourist spot or something interesting to them. What if you got something in the mail that might interest them that has some text on it? You can actually pull those things into guided reading as long as they're an appropriate level, or you provide scaffolding so that the text is accessible to them. Sometimes it's fun and even, has that real world connection of getting kids to read, oh, this came in the mail, or this is a brochure. Like, those are real texts. Not that books aren't, of course, but those are like texts that they might see out in the wild. And so that's so fun for them to have a different experience. And I said I wanted to tie this last one down here too. For guided reading, I typically don't use chapter books because I don't see my kids enough to be finishing a chapter book in less than like 3 weeks. It just tends to go on and on and on unless your kids are reading like those really early chapter books. Those, can be a little bit quicker. Something like Henry and Mudge is technically a chapter book, I would say, or like an early chapter book. I'm talking here more about like those thicker books that maybe late first grade, second graders start to read. Typically don't use those in guided reading because they just take so long and kids lose track of the story. They just have not worked well for me. But what you can do, and this has worked really well with my kids, is if there's a chapter book, and this is great if there's maybe a series that some of your kids aren't picking at the library, or you have some and they're not reading them, but that they might interest them, you can pull that into guided reading. And maybe you read the first chapter or two with your group, and then you invite them, hey, if you liked this book, you can finish reading on your own, and they get to take those chapter books, and during independent reading, they can read more. So this is a nice way to pull in those chapter books without having to, be reading them for like a month and the kids have forgotten what's going on. And it's also, I like to alternate genres when I can. But anyway, that's a nice way to pull in chapter books, and it also kind of advertises a book for the kids to read independently. All right, so I kind of went out of order here, but the last one I want to show you for mixing things up during guided reading is an app for word work. Now, lots of times I have like letter tiles, I have magnetic letters. Those are great for making words, working on phonics, all that good stuff. However, sometimes you might want to do something different, or if you're like me, sometimes you don't have time to pull the exact magnetic letters out for your kids because you're in a rush. So if that's the case, I highly recommend the Word Wizard app. I bought this one a while ago. I believe there's a free version. I don't know how much the free version does because I just used this one that I bought, but the Word Wizard version that I have has this talking movable alphabet. Now I make the kids turn off the sound because otherwise it will like read like words, like letters and sounds and words to them, which is great if they're working independently, but during guided reading, you don't want to have all of the kids, if you have multiple kids in front of you, you don't want to have that audio going on. But basically Word Wizard, and I know it's probably kind of hard to see because of the screen here, but it's basically just, magnetic letters that are digital. So this is nice for working on high frequency words, for working on phonics patterns. As you can see, there's enough room here so that like if the kids were working on a word family, sometimes I'll have them make multiple words in the word family going down. It's nice because you don't run out of magnetic letters. If you're using some of them over and over again, they can make multiple words and kind of compare. And then also, where is it? There are these chunks. And so if you're working on, don't know how well you can see this, but like digraphs, silent letters, stuff like that, you can have the kids see them as a unit, right? And so eventually, of course, you want them to be able to pull the CH by themselves. When you're introducing the concept, it's nice for them to think about, okay, these two letters are different letters, but they work together to make one sound. They also have them for vowel teams and diphthongs as well, I think, yeah. So again, that is the Word Wizard app. Like I said, I did pay for mine because I love it so much, but I believe there's a free version, just something interesting to keep things fresh, because I know sometimes for me, I feel like I'm getting into a rut and we're doing the same thing over and over again, and that's not what I want for myself and my kids. So all of these things help me to switch things up. If there's anything that you do that I did not mention that helps you keep things interesting during guided reading, I would love to hear it in the comments. I will come back later. I have a Kindergarten Literacy Club private webinar that I'm going to shortly, but I will come back and answer those questions or respond to your comments and ideas. I'd love to hear your ideas. And then also, if you need the link for my like guided reading basics webinar, I can give you that. I can also give you the link for my guided reading packs, my bundles that like this stuff comes from. So feel free to let me know if you need any of that, and I will come back and give you a link. And last but not least, don't forget that your small group does not always have to be guided reading. If you join later on, come back and watch the recording of this. Hopefully it'll go to my Facebook page after it's done. But I talked about how you can do all kinds of things in your small group, like read grade level text, even with kids that can't read it on their own yet, like it's way out of reach. You can provide them with support and scaffolding so that they can do it. You can do a shared reading in a small group. You can do a read aloud in a small group. So many different options that go way beyond guided reading. So don't forget that those are always options to you. All right, well, I hope that this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. And again, feel free to leave any comments, questions, and I will come back and answer them. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.